independent. We just distribute the magazine.
I see.
So what you get in Australia is what you get in Britain. The only difference, obviously, will be in the advertisements.
Yeah, okay.
More local, the advertisements, because they're more appropriate, say, to Britain and Europe than they would be to Australia.
Right. Okay, very interesting. So that's a very good overview, I guess, of what Nexus Magazine is, and it's been around for a long time, and it's still there. Is it growing all the time? Do you feel that it's an increase of interest in these kinds of subjects that you mentioned?
There is a continual increase. In fact, Nexus Magazine was originally published in the autumn of 1987, so it's been going just over 20 years. Duncan Rhodes took over as editor in 1990, and he's been the editor ever since. He changed the magazine, the format of the magazine. It was much more of a, I suppose one should say, a new age type of magazine originally. But he did a survey of the readers that existed, this is in 1990, saying, what do you want more of, what do you want less of, what do you want to know about? And he adapted the magazine to that format, which is to include hard-edged, science-based articles.
Right.
Articles on, basically articles on subjects that can be researched and can be followed up.
I see, yeah.
And that was the main change that Duncan took place when he took over.
Right. Very good. So, I mean, that sounds like very much in the areas of what you yourself are interested in. So I guess that this fit perfectly together, so to speak, with what you are interested in and so forth. Do you write anything for Nexus right now, or do any research for Nexus?
I don't write very much. I have written one article for Nexus, and that was to do with crop circles, but that was about 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
My strength, if it's anything, is in being able to sell and distribute the magazine.
Right.
And that's what I like to do, because the subject matter of Nexus is an area that I've had a personal interest in for over 40 years.
Right.
So it is. I'm very fortunate to be able to say that my hobby is my job.
Right. Well, that's
and
excellent.
I've been able to combine an interest in unexplained phenomena, unexplained mysteries, hidden history, many things into what I do. So I respect Duncan's decisions in the editorial side. In fact, I don't know of anybody who has a broader understanding of all these subjects than Duncan Rhodes. I wouldn't consider myself in a position to be able to challenge that, or even to write better than many of the contributors that we have in Nexus.
Right. Sounds very good. And I mean, you've been interesting, and I guess you're also doing research, so to speak, on the side. You mentioned crop circles, for instance. That's one, but there's many other subjects that you're interested in and have been looking at. One of those is, of course, Egypt, as we mentioned, the technology of Egypt and so forth, and how this, I guess, connects with some of Velikovsky's theories. Isn't that right?
Very much so, yes. One of the things I do is to give presentations. I do talks at conferences. I find that quite an interesting way of getting across information. And one of the areas that I have a particular interest in was Egypt, the technology of Egypt. Now, when I say technology, I'm talking about the granite of Egypt. If anybody has been to Egypt, they will be obviously familiar with the Great Pyramid, and the Temple of Karnak, Temple of Luxor, Aswan, and the unfinished obelisk. And I went there a few years ago. I visited Egypt, very fortunately, with a group of people who were of like mind. We were all Nexus readers, and the tour guide was John Anthony West, who's obviously familiar with the challenge he has issued years ago to the dating of the Sphinx.
Right.
And I was very interested to go with him on the tour, where he was able to point out many of the anomalies to do with the Sphinx and the anomalies to do with the Great Pyramid. And I followed that up by giving talks on the subject, and specifically looking at the granite that is used in Egypt. Now, most of the pyramid that you look at is made of limestone, which has been quarried quite close to the pyramid site at Giza.
Mm-hmm.
But inside the Great Pyramid, you'll be familiar with the King's Chamber, and which is a granite-lined room. It's quite big, and inside this granite-lined room is what's called the sarcophagus,
Right.
which in turn is made of granite. A point that not many people are actually aware of is that this granite sarcophagus, which is still inside the King's Chamber, and you can go and lie in it if you want to. It's not very comfortable, but you can get inside it.
Right.
Is that this sarcophagus is too big to go through the only entrance into the King's Chamber, which is a relatively small doorway, about 3 foot square.
Mm-hmm.
The sarcophagus is at least 1 inch too wide and 1 inch too high to enter this doorway. So the question immediately arises is, how did they get it in?
Right, of course.
And it couldn't have been, as the Egyptologists continually insist, that it's a tomb. The Great Pyramid is a tomb,
Right.
and the sarcophagus was the coffin of the pharaoh Khafre. No, it's not. They couldn't get it in. So the only logical explanation is that the sarcophagus was placed in the Great Pyramid, in the King's Chamber, while it was being built.
Yeah.
Because they had to then put the roof on, and there are 5 layers of granite blocks. Each block weighs 50 tons on top of it.
Mm. And
So
how the heck?
question,
Yeah.
sorry,
Yeah. And how the heck did they do that? You know?
exactly.
Yeah.
How on earth do you raise a 50-ton block of granite 200 foot into the air, which is the height of the King's Chamber above ground level? How do you raise it 50 foot into the air?
Right.
And even more questionable is, how do you get a 50-ton block of granite from Aswan, which is 600 kilometers south of the pyramid, in the first place? And you don't just get one block, you get 70 of them. And you think, hang on a minute, is this really the easiest way to build a pyramid, inside of which is a granite-lined room? What are they doing? And how do you cut the granite? Now, an interesting follow-up to that is, if you go to Aswan, which is where all the granite in Egypt actually comes from, it's the only site in Egypt from which the granite that is in the Great Pyramid, the granite that is in the Assyrian at Abydos, which is north of Luxor, and in the quarries at Aswan, you can see what is called the unfinished obelisk. Unfinished because it's still attached to the bedrock.
Right.
Because when it was cut, it was a big trench has been cut around it. The trench is about 3 kilometers deep. Sorry, not 3 kilometers, 3 meters deep.
Right.
All around this obelisk. It's an obelisk shape. And the reason it was unfinished is because it cracked, or there was a big crack in it, and they couldn't then finish it and take it out in one piece. It would have broken. So the question I asked was, how did they cut this trench, which is 3 meters deep, about 1 meter across, and in terms of length, all around this obelisk, which is 42 meters long, we're talking a trench approaching 100 meters. Now, if you ask the question, how did they cut this trench, you will be told they used diorite balls to pound the granite to dust. That is the only explanation that is offered. And I said, I don't believe it.
Right.
Because you can do the calculation quite simply. If you take these diorite balls, of which there are several lying around even now, they look like a big bowling ball. They're about 30 centimeter in diameter, they're quite heavy because they're made of an even harder granite, an even harder material than granite. And you can use one of these to pound the granite surface. Now, if you do the calculations again, how many cubic centimeters of granite can you pound per hour with these diorite balls?
No idea. But
not many.
Not many, exactly.
Not many.
Yeah.
Now, if you do the full calculation, if you had people squatting, which is presumably what they were doing with their pounding diorite balls, squatting side by side around this 100-meter long trench, how long would it take them to get down 3 meters? And the answer is 17 years.
There we go. Very good.
Now, that's not half of it, because you've now got to pound underneath this obelisk to remove it from the bedrock.
Sheesh, my God. Where do you begin? You know, how the heck do you do that?
Exactly.
Well, it's not doable. I mean, it's ridiculous.
So that explanation, which is the only explanation you will be offered by an Egyptologist when you ask that question,
huh.
And if you then laugh at him and say, no, it doesn't make sense because the hieroglyphic descriptions indicate that it took a few weeks to remove the obelisks, you have to come up with another solution. Now, the only other solution I have come up with is something which occurred or was reported originally in a book written by David Hatcher Childress, who incidentally will be one of the speakers at the Beyond Knowledge conference in May.
Yeah.
He reported a description given to Colonel Fawcett. Now, people may not be familiar with that name, but Colonel Fawcett was an explorer in the 1920s. He was a British Army officer, and he disappeared in the Amazonian jungle. But he wrote up a lot of the explorations he did before his disappearance. And one of these descriptions was of what was referred to as rock softening liquid.
Okay.
Produced from plants from the Amazonian rainforest. Now, we know that there are plants in the Amazonian rainforest which can produce some remarkable properties,
Indeed.
such as the liquid put on a poison tip arrow,
right,
made from plants and vines and leaves from the Amazonian rainforest. The rock softening liquid was similarly derived from plants. Now, I don't know which plants. I've been trying to find out, and interestingly, as a friend of mine was in Machu Picchu at Christmas. His daughter was being married and to a Peruvian. He went to Machu Picchu, and I asked him to try to get an answer to this question. Is anybody aware of the rock softening liquid?
Mm.
And he came back and he said, yes, they know about it. It is something which is known. My son-in-law's grandmother knew about it.
Okay.
But she hadn't seen it for many years, but she was familiar with the concept of a rock softening liquid. Now, if you're familiar with some of the megalithic structures in South America, specifically around Machu Picchu,
yeah,
and what is known in English as Sexy Woman, which is the colloquial pronunciation for the enormous walls of megalithic rocks placed in position so closely to each other that you cannot get a piece of paper between them.
Yeah.
It appears that it was a well-known technique in South America at the time of the construction of Machu Picchu, which nobody actually knows what the dates are, and that was exported to Egypt. Now, it could have been the other way around. It could have been from Egypt to South America, but it's unlikely because the plant